since we've talked about photosynthesis, its kind of partner chemical reaction is cellular respiration. And so we're going to take a look at the steps of cellular respiration. So cellular respiration can be summarized as taking one molecule of glucose with 6 molecules of oxygen, and when those combine, they will rearrange to form 6 molecules of carbon dioxide and 6 molecules of water and energy molecules in the form of ATP. And there are 3 stages of cellular respiration: glycolysis, the Krebs cycle, and the electron transport chain. So this is a little different because photosynthesis had 2 stages: the light reactions, RXN is an abbreviation for reaction, and the Calvin cycle. So with cellular respiration, there's one more step. So this is a little summary diagram of cellular respiration, showing you that we start with the glucose, then we go through glycolysis, and note that glycolysis takes place in the cytoplasm. Again, notice there's 2 ATP going in and 4 ATP coming out. We also get some NADH. Remember, NADH is also an energy molecule. And then we get 2 molecules of pyruvate. Pyruvate is made up of 3 carbon atoms. And then those 2 molecules of pyruvate enter the Krebs cycle. And the Krebs cycle releases carbon dioxide, 6 molecules. Notice there's 2 and then 4. We release 2 ATP. We release 2 NADH and another 8 NADH. And then this FADH2, which is also an energy molecule. This FADH2 powers the last step, this oxidative phosphorylation, which is making of ATP, and that we get 34 ATP out of. And so we're going to look at each of these in a little more detail. So first we have glycolysis, and this is that first stage of cellular respiration in which glucose is split. The ending here, lyse, means to cut or to split. And so the glyco in front stands for glucose. So this is the splitting of glucose. And we make 2 molecules of pyruvate. Sometimes pyruvate gets called pyruvic acid. It's the same thing. And then we get 2 net molecules of ATP. So net, we get 2 molecules of ATP, but then total is actually 4 molecules of ATP. And the reason that we get a net is because we have to use 2 molecules of ATP. So we get the 4 minus 2 for 2 net ATP molecules being made. And so this happens in the cytoplasm. And it occurs without oxygen. So a couple important things as we go through these notes is that, one, you need to know the steps, and you need to know which order. So we know glycolysis is first, Krebs cycle is second, and the electron transport is third. And you need to know their location and what happens. So you need to know the step. You need to know the location of that step. And you need to know the reactants and products of each of these steps. So this step is glycolysis. We could call it step 1. Location is the cytoplasm. Reactants, we take glucose and 2 ATP because we use 2 ATP. And we make 2 molecules of pyruvate, 4 molecules of ATP, and I believe it's 2 molecules of NADH. So that would be what for sure you need to know about glycolysis for like the test. So the results of glycolysis, first of all, it requires 2 molecules of ATP in order to power glycolysis. So remember that was under our reactants. And then it produces a total of 4 ATP molecules, but we only get 2 net molecules because we have to replace the 2 that were used up here. So we also have high energy electrons that get transferred to NAD+, which makes 2 molecules of NADH. So remember, this is another energy molecule, or another 2 energy molecules, and those are another product, all of which we summarized on the slide before. So glycolysis can happen without oxygen. That makes it an anaerobic respiration because it does not require oxygen or O2. And so glycolysis is an example of that. And so back in Earth's early atmosphere, about 3.5 to 4 billion years ago, Earth's atmosphere did not have any oxygen in it. And so glycolysis was a process that could happen back then as a form of making energy for early organisms. Eventually, 2 to 3 billion years ago, oxygen gradually got added to the atmosphere by photosynthetic bacteria, and so aerobic respiration began to develop. And this is a type of cellular respiration that requires oxygen. And today, most of the organisms use oxygen to produce ATP because we can make more ATP than anaerobic respiration. So it makes more ATP than anaerobic respiration. So the second and third steps of the cellular respiration occurs in the mitochondria. And so we need to look at some of the structures in the mitochondria. So first we have the inner membrane, and that's right here. I know it's kind of hard to see. The inner membrane is this red structure, and that's where the electron transport happens. And then in the matrix, which is right here, we'll use a different color. The matrix is where the Krebs cycle occurs. And so the matrix, I think, looks like a swimming pool in the middle of the mitochondria. And then that inner membrane where the electron transport occurs is just the outside edges of the mitochondria. So before the Krebs cycle begins, remember the Krebs cycle is step 2, the pyruvate from glycolysis has to combine with an enzyme that we call CoA. And so this produces a 2-carbon atom that we call acetyl-CoA. And then 1 carbon atom will combine with oxygen to produce carbon dioxide. This carbon dioxide gets released as a waste product. And so we can see this beginning step right here. So we take a pyruvate, or remember it can be called pyruvic acid too. We release a carbon dioxide, and look, we also make an energy molecule and acetyl-CoA. So the Krebs cycle then can begin once that step is completed. And so this is the second stage. It's aerobic respiration, in which 2 pyruvate molecules from the first stage, or glycolysis, react to form ATP. We also make NADPH and FADH2. And all 3 of these are energy molecules. So pyruvate will enter into the matrix, or that swimming pool area of the mitochondria. And that's where this Krebs cycle takes place. Notice in the diagram, sometimes the Krebs cycle is referred to as the citric acid cycle. They Two different names, but it's the same cycle. So the steps of the Krebs cycle, there's 3 important steps. The acetyl-CoA combines with something called oxaloacetate to form citric acid. So here we're forming citric acid. Notice that it says 6C by citric acid, and that tells you that it is made up of 6 carbon atoms. So that's the first step. Then your second step is to have the citric acid. It releases energy. So notice how these arrows over here are going out. And that tells you that it's releasing, in this case, the NADH. And so we also are releasing carbon dioxide. So then our third step is to regenerate oxaloacetate. And so that happens up here. We regenerate that oxaloacetate over there, gets remade. And so the Krebs cycle is going to go through 2 times. It's going to turn twice, since we start with 2 molecules of that pyruvate during glycolysis. So 1 pyruvate enters at once, and then once that has been made into oxaloacetate, then the second molecule will go through this cycle. So notice too that we're making ATP and FADH2. All of these where you see the arrows bopping out is telling you what is being produced. So for us, remember I said you need to know the step, the location, the reactants, and the products. So here, our step is the Krebs cycle, or it's step 2. Takes place in the mitochondria. And specifically, you do need to know it takes place in the matrix. Our reactants are 2 molecules of pyruvate. And we make carbon dioxide. We make ATP. See the ATP. We also make some NADH. Or NADH. And we also make some FADH2. I'm not so worried that you remember the molecules that we make as opposed to the energy molecules. So the results of the Krebs cycle, after the second turn of the Krebs cycle, that original glucose molecule is completely broken down. It no longer exists. All 6 of the carbon atoms, remember glucose is C6H12O6, so all 6 of those carbon atoms have combined with oxygen, and that makes our carbon dioxide. So we get 16 total energy molecules. 4 of them are ATP. 2 of those are from glycolysis. We get 10 NADH molecules. Again, 2 are from glycolysis. And 2 FADH2 molecules. So that's where we get a total, up to this point, we have a total of 16 energy-carrying molecules. So then our third stage is the electron transport chain. And so energy from the NADH and the FADH2 are transferred to ATP. So this is done by high energy electrons that move along an electron transport chain like photosynthesis. Slightly different because there's no light energy. Instead, the energy comes from NADH, and FADH2. So this happens in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And some energy is captured then, and it's used to pump the hydrogen ions across the inner membrane from the matrix to the inner membrane space. So here is your electron transport. Remember, it just is pumping hydrogen ions across. And then the last step is to make water. That means your final electron acceptor, the last molecule that can take an electron, is oxygen. So to make ATP, we have to pump those hydrogen ions across the inner membrane. And that's going to create a greater concentration of ions in the inner membrane space. And this causes the ions to flow back across the membrane into the matrix. So then we have ATP synthase, which we should remember from photosynthesis, acts as a channel protein, and it helps keep those hydrogen ions, it helps them cross that membrane, and it forms ATP from ADP. Remember, we take ADP and we add a phosphate group to it to make ATP. So, and then we have electrons combining with oxygen to form a water molecule. Again, since we deal with oxygen, it makes it aerobic respiration. So here we have that picture again a little bit bigger. And so we can see the hydrogen ions here, here, and here getting pumped across the inner membrane space. And so that means we have a lot of hydrogen ions in that inner membrane space. So here it tells you that we have a high concentration of hydrogen ions. And so ATP synthase here acts as a channel protein and allows those hydrogen ions to come back in to the matrix where it has a low hydrogen ion concentration. And we can see that that process allows ADP to combine with a phosphate group to make ATP. So again, I'm not worried that you know the different names of the electron transport. What you need to know is what ATP synthase does here, and that the hydrogen and will combine with oxygen to make water. So how much ATP do we get? So glycolysis produces 2 ATP. The Krebs cycle will also produce 2 ATP. These are net ATP up here. And the electron transport can create up to 34 ATP if in ideal conditions. For a grand total of 2 plus 2 is 4 plus 34. So 2 plus 2 plus 34 equals a grand total of up to 38 ATP. So let's go through and look at a review of the electron transport. So we need the step, the location, reactants, and products. So our step would be the electron transport. Which is step 3. And this happens in the inner membrane of the mitochondria. And here our reactants are actually energy molecules of NADH and FADH2. And we make ATP and water. in this step. So those are the 3 steps of cellular respiration. And so remember, you need to know what each step is, where it happens, the reactants of each step, and what is produced in each step.